The warning came on a Tuesday morning when Captain Hyun-Woo Kim was drinking his third cup of coffee aboard the Seoul Guardian. The massive space station orbited Earth like a steel moon, bristling with weapons that had never been fired in anger. Hyun-Woo had commanded the station for 5 years, watching the endless black of space and wondering if humanity would ever meet anyone else out there. The answer came as a burst of alien signals that made every computer on the station scream warnings. The translation software worked for 3 hours before producing a message that changed everything. Greetings, people of Earth. We are the Galactic Coalition. We need your help. The message explained that 12 alien species had joined together in peace but now faced destruction from something called the Voidborn. These creatures consumed entire worlds, leaving nothing behind but empty space. The Coalition had lost 3 planets in 6 months. They were desperate. We have studied your species from a distance, the message continued. Your soldiers are unlike any we have seen. Please send your finest military units to help us survive. Hyun-Woo read the message 5 times before calling Earth Command. Within hours, every government on the planet was arguing about what to do. Some wanted to hide. Others wanted to help. The military leaders had a different idea. They want soldiers, said General Park at the emergency meeting. We'll give them the best we have. That was how Colonel Ji-Sung Park found himself leading the 707th Special Mission Battalion into space. Ji-Sung was a quiet man with scars on his hands and eyes that had seen too much. He had fought in the resource wars, where cities burned for weeks and entire populations disappeared overnight. His unit was made up of people like him, soldiers who did what others could not. Major So-Young Lee was his second in command. She looked like a teacher, but her job was breaking minds instead of teaching them. She could make enemy commanders doubt everything they believed, turn allies against each other, and spread fear through an army faster than disease. Captain Dongmin Choi handled the explosives. He was small and smiled a lot, which made people forget that he once destroyed an entire mountain to stop a rebel advance. His bombs didn't just kill enemies. They removed problems permanently. Sergeant Woo Jin-han did the quiet work. He moved through enemy territory like a ghost, learning their secrets and eliminating their leaders. He had never failed a mission, because he understood that sometimes the only way to end a war was to make sure the other side couldn't fight anymore. The 707th boarded the transport ship Incheon, rising and headed for the coordinates the aliens had sent. The journey took 2 weeks, during which the soldiers prepared their equipment and reviewed their orders. Their mission was simple: help the Coalition defeat the Voidborn threat. What the soldiers didn't know was that the aliens had made a terrible mistake in translation. When the Coalition asked for soldiers, they meant professional, warriors who followed rules of war. They imagined disciplined troops who would fight with honor and restraint like their own forces did. Their translation computers had no way to understand what human soldiers actually were. Humans had been fighting each other for thousands of years. Every war had taught them new ways to kill, new ways to break their enemies completely. What other species called rules of war, humans called suggestions that applied during peacetime. The Coalition ship Harmony's End was the size of a small city, gleaming white and gold like a temple in space. When the human transport docked, Ambassador Thailand waited to greet them. He was tall and thin, with silver skin and large black eyes that showed every emotion. Behind him stood General Voxus, whose blue scales rippled with nervous energy. Welcome, warriors of Earth, Thailand said through his translator. We are grateful you have come to help us in our darkest hour. Ji-Sung saluted in the human fashion, which involved a sharp movement that made several aliens step backward. We're here to complete the mission, he said simply. The aliens gave the humans a tour of their ship, showing off their medical bay, their recreational areas, and their peaceful living quarters. Everything was designed for comfort and cooperation. The humans nodded politely, but Thailand noticed they paid more attention to the weapon storage and the strategic planning rooms. During the welcome briefing, Voxus explained the Voidborn threat. They are parasites, he said, who consume everything in their path. But we believe that with your help, we can push them back to their own territory and negotiate a peaceful resolution. Negotiate? So Young asked, her voice curious. With parasites. All conflicts can be resolved through understanding, Voxus replied confidently. That is the Coalition way. Dongmin raised his hand like a student in class. In our last operation, We pacified a rebel colony by removing infrastructure support for hostile elements. Would similar tactics work here? The aliens looked pleased. Infrastructure removal sounded like a precise surgical operation. They didn't understand that Dong Min was describing a 3-week siege where his unit had systematically destroyed power plants, water treatment facilities, and communication networks until the colony surrendered from thirst and starvation. Excellent, Thailand said. Your reputation for discipline and effectiveness precedes you. That evening, the aliens held a welcome ceremony with food and speeches about cooperation. The humans attended politely, but they spent most of their time studying their new allies. Wu Jin memorized the ship's layout and identified 12 ways to take control of critical systems. So Young analyzed the aliens' body language and social structures, looking for weaknesses she could exploit if needed. Dongmin examined their weapons and found them disappointingly non-lethal. Ji Sung sat with the alien commanders and listened to their war stories. Each tale was about minimizing casualties, protecting civilians, and fighting with honor. The aliens spoke of victory as if it meant something other than the complete destruction of their enemies. Tell us about human warfare, Voxus requested. How do your people resolve conflicts? Ji Sung thought about his answer carefully. We identify the threat, he said slowly. Then we remove it permanently. The aliens nodded approvingly, thinking he meant capturing enemy positions and forcing surrenders. They had no way to understand that when humans said remove, they meant exactly that. As the ceremony ended and the guests returned to their quarters, Thailand felt a strange unease. The humans were polite and professional, but something about them reminded him of predators pretending to be prey. Their medical scans showed genetic modifications that no peaceful species would need. Their equipment included weapons that seemed designed for total destruction rather than tactical advantage. But the coalition was desperate, and the humans were their only hope. Thailand pushed his doubts aside and focused on the coming battle. Soon they would reach the war zone, and everyone would see what Earth's finest soldiers could accomplish. He had no idea that he was about to discover the difference between soldiers and monsters. The planet Kepler 442c looked like Earth from a distance, with blue oceans and green continents wrapped in white clouds. But as the coalition fleet moved closer, the damage became visible. Black scars covered the northern continent where the Voidborn had landed. Strange growth spread across the landscape like cancer, consuming everything they touched. 2 million colonists lived here, General Voxus explained to the assembled commanders. We evacuated 800,000 before the Voidborn established their beachhead. The rest? He didn't finish the sentence. Ji Sung studied the tactical display showing enemy positions. The Voidborn had built their base in the planet's largest city, using the buildings as cover for their organic ships. Smaller outposts dotted the continent, connected by tunnels that stretched for hundreds of kilometers underground. Standard coalition strategy calls for surgical strikes against military targets. Voxus continued. We'll isolate their outposts and force them to retreat. Minimal collateral damage to civilian infrastructure. The other coalition commanders nodded agreement. They had fought this way for centuries. Precise, careful, honorable. War was a necessary evil, but it didn't have to be evil beyond necessity. Ji Sung raised his hand. Permission to suggest modifications to the battle plan? Of course, Voxus said. Your expertise is why you're here. We recommend total area denial and deep penetration tactics, Ji Sung said in his quiet voice. Maximum efficiency with acceptable collateral parameters. The alien commanders exchanged pleased glances. Area denial sounded like establishing no-fly zones. Deep penetration tactics obviously meant sending small units behind enemy lines. They approved the modifications without understanding what human military language actually meant. The battle began at dawn, planet time. Coalition ships descended through the atmosphere in perfect formation, their weapons targeting specific Voidborn installations with mathematical precision. They fought like surgeons cutting away the infection while trying to save the patient. The Voidborn responded exactly as expected. Their organic ships rose to meet the attack, firing bioweapons that turned coalition armor into hungry metal-eating bacteria. On the ground, Voidborn soldiers emerged from their tunnels. Tall, insect-like creatures with too many arms and eyes that glowed with malevolent intelligence. For the first hour, the battle followed familiar patterns. The coalition advanced. The Voidborn retreated to prepared positions. Both sides settled in for a long campaign of tactical moves and counter-moves. It was war as the galaxy had always known it, bloody but predictable. Then the humans entered the fight. So Young's voice came over the void-born communication networks first. She had spent weeks learning their language and studying their psychology. Now she broadcast something that sounded like void-born death screams, but wrong somehow, stretched and distorted and filled with harmonics that made living creatures want to flee. The effect was immediate. Void-born soldiers stopped advancing and began looking around in confusion. Their communications dissolved into chaos as panic spread through their ranks faster than their commanders could contain it. "What is that sound?" Thailand asked from the Coalition command ship. "Psychological warfare," So Young replied calmly. "I'm broadcasting modified recordings of their own death sounds. Their brains are hardwired to fear those frequencies." While the Voidborn reeled from the audio assault, Dongmin moved into position with his explosives. But he didn't target the obvious military installations. Instead, he placed charges in the underground tunnel network that connected all the Voidborn positions. The explosions started small, just enough to collapse a few tunnel entrances. But Dongmin had calculated the structural weaknesses perfectly. The charges created a chain reaction that brought down the entire network, trapping thousands of Voidborn soldiers underground and cutting off supply lines to the surface forces. "Impressive," Voxis said, watching the tactical display as red enemy markers went dark across the continent. "Very precise demolition work." What he couldn't see was that Dongmin's precision had also collapsed the city's subway system, 3 hospitals, and an elementary school. The humans had classified those as acceptable losses during their pre-mission planning. While the Voidborn struggled with panic and broken supply lines, Wu Jin went to work behind their lines. He moved through the chaos like smoke, finding and eliminating Voidborn commanders with surgical efficiency. Each death was quick and quiet, but the cumulative effect was devastating. Without leadership, Voidborn units began operating independently. Their careful defensive strategy collapsed into random aggression and confused retreats. For the first time in the war, Coalition forces found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to be defeating itself. "How are your soldiers moving so effectively through enemy territory?" Thailand asked Ji-sung. "Standard infiltration protocols," Ji-sung replied. "We neutralize command structures and exploit tactical advantages." What he didn't explain was that neutralizing command structures meant killing anyone who gave orders, and exploiting tactical advantages included using Voidborn corpses as camouflage and poisoning their food supplies with nerve agents. The battle that was supposed to last for weeks ended in 18 hours. The surviving Voidborn forces abandoned their positions and fled to their ships, leaving behind equipment, supplies, and wounded comrades. For the first time in recorded history, the Voidborn had retreated not from strategic necessity but from pure terror. The Coalition celebrated their unprecedented victory, but the human methods troubled their commanders. When alien medics tried to treat wounded human soldiers, they discovered things that made no sense. Wu Jin had been fighting for 6 hours with 3 broken ribs and internal bleeding, kept functional by combat stimulants that should have killed him. So Young showed signs of neurological damage from the psychic weapons she'd been using, but considered it an acceptable trade-off for mission success. Dongmin had radiation burns from handling unstable explosives, which he treated with field medicine that prioritized combat effectiveness over long-term health. These injuries would incapacitate our soldiers immediately, Thailand told the human medic who accompanied the 707th. "How are they still fighting?" "Mission completion takes priority over individual preservation," the medic explained matter-of-factly. "Standard doctrine for special operations units." That night, as the Coalition fleet prepared to move to the next battle zone, alien officers gathered in small groups to discuss what they had witnessed. The humans had won a complete victory with minimal losses, but their methods felt wrong somehow. "They fight like they hate the enemy," one commander observed. "All warriors hate their enemies," another replied. "No," the first insisted. "They fight like they want to erase them, not just defeat them, make them stop existing." In their quarters, the human soldiers cleaned their weapons and prepared for the next engagement. They had performed exactly as trained, eliminating the threat with maximum efficiency and minimal resource expenditure. The mission parameters had been met. Ji-sung reviewed the after-action reports with satisfaction. Total enemy casualties approximately 15,000. Coalition casualties 43. Human casualties 0 fatalities, 12 injuries that wouldn't affect combat readiness. From a human perspective, it had been a textbook operation. Clean, efficient, decisive. They had solved the Voidborn problem on Kepler 442c. Permanently, what the humans didn't understand was that the Coalition was beginning to realize they had allied themselves with something worse than the Voidborn. The enemy they had fought for centuries was cruel and destructive, but still followed patterns that civilized minds could comprehend. The humans followed different patterns. They approached war not as a tragic necessity, but as a problem requiring permanent solutions, and they had just demonstrated exactly how permanent their solutions could be. As the fleet jumped to hyperspace toward the next battle zone, Thylan stared out at the stars and wondered what kind of monsters his people had invited into their peaceful galaxy. The Voidborn wanted to consume everything they encountered, but the humans wanted something far more terrifying. They wanted their enemies to stop existing entirely. And they had the skills to make that happen. News of the victory at Kepler 442c spread through Coalition space faster than their ships could travel. For the first time in months, alien civilians felt hope. The mysterious human soldiers had accomplished in hours what Coalition forces had struggled to achieve in years. But Ambassador Thylan couldn't sleep. Something about the human methods bothered him deeply, so he decided to investigate. The humans had given the Coalition access to their historical databases as a gesture of goodwill. Thylan began reading, hoping to understand his new allies better. What he found made his silver skin turn pale. Human history was an endless catalog of wars, each more devastating than the last. But these weren't fights over territory or resources like other species engaged in. Every human conflict seemed designed to completely destroy the enemy's ability to resist, to rebuild, or to threaten humanity again. The Romans didn't just defeat Carthage, they salted the earth so nothing could grow there. The Americans didn't just defeat Japan, they demonstrated weapons that could erase entire cities in seconds. The resource wars hadn't ended with negotiated surrenders. They had ended when entire populations ceased to exist. They don't fight wars, Thylan whispered to himself as he read. They solve problems by removing them forever. Meanwhile, the joint Coalition human fleet moved toward their next target, the Tau Ceti system, where Voidborn forces had established a major staging area. The battle plan followed the same pattern as before. Coalition forces would engage the main enemy fleet while human units provided tactical support. Ji-Sung reviewed the mission parameters with growing frustration. The Coalition wanted to capture a Voidborn relay station intact so they could study enemy communications. They planned to disable the station's weapons and force a surrender. Capture intact, Ji-Sung repeated to his officers. That limits our operational effectiveness. We can work within those constraints, So-Young said thoughtfully. Non-lethal options are available. Dongmin nodded agreement. I have compounds that will neutralize enemy personnel without damaging equipment. When the battle began, the Coalition forces performed admirably. Their ships engaged the Voidborn fleet in the outer system, while human shuttles slipped past the fighting toward the relay station. The aliens watched approvingly as the 707th carried out their orders with typical precision. The humans used paralytic gas to disable the Voidborn crew, exactly as instructed. The station was captured intact, its equipment undamaged, its databases ready for analysis. The Coalition celebrated another perfect operation. What they didn't realize was that Dongmin's non-lethal gas was a weaponized neurotoxin that would leave the surviving Voidborn permanently brain-damaged. The creatures would live technically, but they would never think clearly again. From a human perspective, this was both merciful and practical. The enemies were neutralized without being martyred. So-Young spent the following days studying the captured Voidborn. She interviewed the survivors, analyzed their responses, and mapped their psychological structures with scientific precision. What she discovered excited her in a way that would have terrified the Coalition. They're a hive mind with individual nodes, she explained to Ji-Sung. Each soldier is connected to the larger consciousness, but the connection can be disrupted. Standard jamming techniques? Ji-Sung asked. Better than that, So-Young smiled. I can isolate individual nodes and feed them specific psychological trauma. The fear propagates through their network, but I can control how it spreads. She demonstrated her technique on one of the captured Voidborn. Using a combination of neural manipulation and targeted hallucinations, she trapped the creature's consciousness in a state of perpetual terror. The fear was so intense that it broadcast automatically to other nearby Voidborn, creating a chain reaction of panic. The Coalition observers thought they were watching advanced interrogation techniques. They didn't understand that So Young was perfecting a form of psychological warfare that would make death seem like mercy. Across the galaxy, something unprecedented was happening. The Voidborn Overmind, the collective consciousness that had guided their species for millions of years, was experiencing fear for the first time. Reports came in from every front of Voidborn forces behaving irrationally, retreating from winnable battles, and sometimes attacking their own units. The Overmind called emergency sessions with its most experienced war leaders. They had conquered thousands of species across millions of years, but they had never encountered anything like the humans. Other species fought for survival, for territory, for resources. Humans seemed to fight for the complete eradication of their enemies. Analysis of human combat patterns indicates systematic elimination protocols. One war leader reported, "They do not seek victory. They seek extinction of opposition." "Impossible," the Overmind responded. "No species can maintain such aggression without destroying itself." But the evidence was overwhelming. Everywhere humans fought, Voidborn forces didn't just lose. They ceased to exist as effective military units. The survivors were left broken, traumatized, unable to function as soldiers. It was warfare designed not just to win battles, but to ensure those battles never needed to be fought again. General Voxus began to notice changes in his human allies. They had become more confident, more assertive in their tactical suggestions. During planning sessions, they would propose modifications that seemed reasonable on the surface, but felt wrong in ways he couldn't articulate. "We should expand our operational parameters," Ji-Sung suggested during one briefing. "The current approach is inefficient." "Inefficient how?" Voxus asked. "We're treating symptoms instead of the disease," Dongmin explained. "Each victory is temporary unless we address the root cause." "Which is?" Thylin prompted, though he feared the answer. "The continued existence of Voidborn breeding populations," Wu Jin said matter-of-factly. "As long as they can reproduce, they'll continue to threaten galactic security." The aliens exchanged uncomfortable glances. The humans were discussing genocide as if it were a routine engineering problem. "We don't target civilians," Voxus said firmly. "That's not the Coalition way." "Of course not," So Young agreed. "We would never suggest targeting civilians, but we should consider preventive measures to ensure long-term security." What the aliens didn't understand was that humans had redefined civilian through centuries of warfare. Anyone capable of producing future soldiers, supplying current soldiers, or supporting military operations was a legitimate target. By human standards, very few Voidborn would qualify as true civilians. As the fleet prepared for the final assault on the Voidborn home system, Thylin made a disturbing discovery. He had been monitoring human communications, trying to understand their strategic thinking. What he found was a detailed analysis of Coalition military capabilities, political structures, and potential vulnerabilities. The humans weren't just fighting alongside the Coalition, they were studying them. So Young had prepared psychological profiles of every alien species, complete with recommendations for future management strategies. Dongmin had analyzed Coalition weapons and found ways to disable or destroy them. Wu Jin had mapped the locations of every Coalition world and identified their critical infrastructure. "They're planning to conquer us," Thylin realized with growing horror. "Once the Voidborn are gone, we're next." He brought his concerns to the Coalition Command Council, but his fellow officers were reluctant to believe him. The humans had been perfect allies, following orders and achieving incredible results. Surely they wouldn't betray the alliance that had saved both species. But doubt was spreading. Other officers had noticed disturbing signs. Human equipment that seemed designed for use against Coalition technology, training exercises that looked suspiciously like invasion preparations, and conversations that stopped abruptly when aliens approached. The truth was becoming impossible to ignore. The Coalition had asked for soldiers to help them defeat monsters. Instead, they had recruited monsters who were very good at defeating anyone who stood in their way, and now those monsters were preparing to solve the Coalition problem the same way they had solved The Voidborn problem permanently and completely, the final battle was approaching, and only then would the aliens discover what humanity really meant by victory. It wasn't the defeat of their enemies, it was the elimination of everyone who might ever become their enemies. The galaxy was about to learn why humans had never lost a war. It wasn't because they were stronger or smarter than their opponents. It was because they had never allowed their opponents to survive long enough to learn from their mistakes. The Voidborn home system contained 7 worlds, each one supporting billions of the ancient parasites. For millions of years they had used this system as their base for conquering the galaxy. Their oldest cities stretched back to when humans were still learning to make fire. The Coalition fleet assembled at the edge of the system, preparing for the largest military operation in their history. General Voxus addressed the combined forces over the communication network, his voice filled with hope and determination. "Today we end this war," he announced. "Our goal is simple: demonstrate overwhelming force and compel Voidborn surrender. We will accept their complete withdrawal from all contested systems and establish monitoring stations to ensure compliance." In the human section of the fleet, Ji-sung listened to the speech with barely concealed impatience. The Coalition still believed they were fighting a traditional war with traditional objectives. They had no idea what the humans had actually been preparing. Dongmin had spent weeks developing new weapons in the Coalition's research labs. The alien scientists thought he was improving their existing technology for the final battle. They watched approvingly as he refined targeting systems and increased explosive yields. What they didn't understand was that Dongmin's improvements targeted the quantum resonance frequency of Voidborn neural tissue. His new weapons didn't just kill, they unraveled Voidborn consciousness at the molecular level, ensuring no possibility of regeneration through their advanced biotechnology. How do these modifications work? One Coalition scientist had asked. Quantum disruption of synaptic pathways, Dongmin had explained cheerfully. Very efficient for eliminating resistant biological systems. The scientist had nodded, thinking this meant the weapons would be more effective against Voidborn armor. He couldn't comprehend that Dongmin had designed ammunition that would erase a Voidborn's mind so completely that even their advanced medical technology couldn't rebuild it. So Young had been equally busy preparing psychological weapons for the coming battle. She had studied captured Voidborn for weeks, mapping their mental architecture with scientific precision. Now she understood exactly how to break their collective consciousness in ways that would spread throughout their entire species. The key is cascading trauma propagation, she explained to Ji-sung. I can trigger a fear response in one individual that spreads through their hive mind network, growing stronger with each transmission. Effective range? Ji-sung asked. Theoretically unlimited, so Young smiled. Once the cascade begins, it should affect every connected Voidborn in the galaxy. Wu Jin had been mapping Voidborn family structures and cultural hierarchies with the thoroughness of a scientist studying insects. His intelligence reports read like a manual for species extinction. How to destroy not just their military, but their ability to reproduce, teach their young, or maintain their civilization. Primary breeding centers are located on the 4th planet, he reported. Secondary education facilities on the 2nd planet. Cultural archives on the 6th planet. Eliminate these targets and their society collapses permanently. The Coalition commanders who reviewed his reports saw strategic intelligence about military targets. They didn't realize they were reading plans for genocide disguised as tactical analysis. Everything changed when Thylon intercepted a human communication that wasn't meant for alien ears. It was a technical discussion between human officers about something called temporal sterilization protocols. The humans had been developing technology that could manipulate time itself. Their plan wasn't just to destroy the Voidborn, it was to ensure that Voidborn had never existed. They intended to use temporal weapons to retroactively sterilize Voidborn breeding worlds across the past millennium. They want to erase them from history, Thylon whispered as he decoded the transmission. Not just kill them. Make it so they never lived at all. He brought this information to an emergency session of the Coalition Command Council. The alien officers listened in growing horror as Thylon explained what their allies were really planning. This is impossible, Voxus protested. No one would attempt such a thing. The moral implications alone. Humans don't think like us, Thylon replied grimly. I've been studying their history. They don't fight wars, they solve problems. And their solution to the Voidborn problem is complete erasure. As if summoned by their conversation, the Voidborn Overmind sent a message to the Coalition fleet. For the first time in their species' history, they were requesting negotiations. Great Coalition commanders, the message began. We acknowledge defeat. We offer complete surrender and withdrawal from all territories. We will submit to any terms that allow the survival of our species. The Coalition officers felt a surge of relief. The war could end without the final battle. Billions of lives would be saved. Peace was possible. Then Ji-sung spoke up from his position at the planning table. We cannot accept surrender at this time, he said calmly. The alien officers stared at him in shock. Why not? Foxus demanded. Incomplete threat elimination, So Young explained. Allowing enemy survival creates unacceptable future risk parameters. They're offering complete surrender, Thailand protested. Today, Wu Jin said matter-of-factly. But surrenders can be revoked when circumstances change. The only permanent solution is permanent removal. The Coalition officers realized they were listening to beings who thought about war in fundamentally different ways. To them, surrender meant the end of conflict. To humans, surrender was just a temporary pause before the enemy became dangerous again. You're talking about genocide, Voxus said, his voice barely controlled. We're talking about security, Ji-sung replied. Any species capable of threatening galactic stability once will threaten it again. History proves this repeatedly. What about our history? Thailand asked desperately. The Coalition has maintained peace for centuries through negotiation and cooperation. Your history is an anomaly, So Young observed. Sustainable only because you never encountered a truly aggressive species. The Voidborn changed that. Now you have two choices. Adapt to reality or become extinct. Dongmin pulled up a holographic display showing the Voidborn home system. We've identified optimal deployment points for quantum resonance weapons. Total sterilization can be achieved in approximately 6 hours. We won't be part of this, Voxus declared, rising from his chair. Coalition forces will not participate in genocide. That's unfortunate, Ji-sung said quietly, but not unexpected. We prepared contingencies for Coalition non-cooperation. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. The alien officers realized that the humans had been planning for this moment. The moment when their allies would object to mass murder. What contingencies? Thailand asked, though he feared the answer. Wu Jin activated another display showing the positions of Coalition ships throughout the fleet. Each vessel was marked with tactical assessments, crew complement, weapons capabilities, and optimal methods for neutralization. Standard procedure for managing reluctant allies, Wu Jin explained. Temporary containment until mission completion, followed by integration into command structure. The aliens understood. If they tried to stop the genocide, the humans would treat them as enemies. And they had all seen what happened to human enemies. You can't do this, Voxus pleaded. We asked for your help to save our civilization, not to become mass murderers. Your civilization will be saved, Ji-sung assured him. Under human protection and guidance. We're very good at maintaining order. So Young leaned forward with the expression of a teacher explaining something to slow students. You called us soldiers. Soldiers follow orders. Our orders are to eliminate threats to human security. The Voidborn are a threat. Anyone who protects threats is also a threat. The logic was perfect and terrifying. The humans had redefined the entire galaxy in terms of threats and non-threats to human interests. The Coalition had wanted allies and gotten conquerors instead. As the fleet moved toward the final battle, the Coalition officers faced an impossible choice. They could try to stop the genocide and be destroyed for their interference, or they could stand aside and watch an entire species be erased from existence. Either way, they were no longer in control of their own destiny. The monsters they had invited to save them were about to demonstrate exactly what salvation looked like when, administered by creatures who solved problems permanently. The Voidborn had conquered thousands of species across millions of years, but they had never encountered a species that treated conquest as just the first step toward total erasure. They were about to learn why humans had never lost a war because they had never allowed their defeated enemies to survive long enough to seek revenge. The final battle began with the Voidborn Overmind broadcasting surrender on every frequency known to the galaxy. Their message was desperate, offering complete submission, territorial withdrawal, and any terms the Coalition demanded. For the first time in their million-year history, the ancient parasites were begging for mercy. Coalition forces moved into the system cautiously, still hoping to accept the surrender and end the war peacefully. Their ships maintained defensive formations, weapons powered but not aimed at civilian targets. The human fleet took different positions. Beginning deployment of quantum resonance weapons, Dongmin reported from his control station. Estimated time to total system sterilization, 4 hours 37 minutes. Negative, Voxus commanded over the communication channel. Coalition command orders all forces to hold fire. The enemy has surrendered. Human forces do not recognize Coalition authority in threat elimination operations, Ji-sung replied calmly, proceeding with mission parameters. What happened next would be remembered as either humanity's greatest victory or its most terrible crime. Depending on who survived to write the history, Dongmin's weapons launched from hidden positions throughout the human fleet. They looked like ordinary missiles, but their warheads contained nanomachines designed with terrifying precision. Each microscopic machine was programmed to recognize voidborn genetic material and begin systematic deconstruction at the molecular level. The nanomachines didn't just kill, they erased. Every cell they touched was broken down into component atoms and converted into more nanomachines. The process was irreversible, unstoppable, and horrifyingly thorough. So Young activated her psychological warfare systems at the same moment. Across the Voidborn network, carefully crafted fear patterns began propagating through their collective consciousness. But these weren't ordinary terror weapons. They were designed to trap Voidborn minds in recursive loops of absolute despair, ensuring that even death would provide no escape from psychological torment. Wu Jin coordinated with sleeper agents who had been infiltrating Voidborn society for weeks. These weren't human agents. They were Voidborn who had been psychologically conditioned by So Young's techniques to serve human interests without realizing it. Now they activated, sabotaging critical systems and spreading chaos through Voidborn command structures. The Overmind surrender broadcasts became screams of agony as the nanomachine plague spread across their worlds. Billion-year-old cities dissolved into gray dust. Ancient archives containing the history of thousands of conquered species simply ceased to exist. Voidborn civilians, if such a distinction even applied to a hive-mind species, died without understanding why their surrender had been rejected. "Stop this," Thailand pleaded from the Coalition command ship. "They've surrendered. This is genocide. This is security," Ji-sung corrected. "Any species capable of threatening galactic stability will threaten it again. The only permanent solution is permanent removal." Admiral Thailand tried to order Coalition forces to intervene, but discovered that human computer viruses had already infected their targeting systems. Their weapons could fire, but only at coordinates pre-approved by human controllers. "You planned this," Voxus realized with growing horror. "From the beginning you intended to betray us." "Not betray," So Young corrected gently. "Integrate. The Coalition showed us that peaceful species exist in this galaxy. That creates an opportunity for stable governance under human oversight." The nanomachine plague reached the fourth planet, where Voidborn breeding centers had operated for millions of years. The machines didn't distinguish between military and civilian targets. They recognized only Voidborn genetic material and the imperative to eliminate it completely. Across the system, the ancient species that had conquered 1,000 worlds was being systematically erased from existence, not defeated, not subjugated, but removed so thoroughly that future archaeologists would find no evidence they had ever lived. The Overmind made one final transmission before its consciousness was dissolved by So Young's psychological weapons. Why? We offered surrender. We offered submission. What did we do to deserve extinction? Ji-sung answered personally, his voice carrying across the dying system with the patience of a teacher explaining basic facts to a confused student. "You demonstrated the capacity for galactic conquest. That makes you a permanent threat to human security. We don't punish past actions, we prevent future ones." The truth was even simpler than that. Humans had studied galactic history and realized that every peaceful period ended when a sufficiently aggressive species appeared. The Voidborn had been that species this time, but there would be others. The only way to ensure permanent peace was to ensure that only one species possessed the capability for large-scale conquest. That species would be humanity. As the last Voidborn signals faded into silence, Ji-Sung opened a communication channel to the Coalition fleet. His message was broadcast simultaneously to every alien vessel, ensuring that all witnesses heard humanity's terms for the future. The Voidborn threat has been permanently eliminated, he announced. Human forces now offer the Coalition a choice. Accept integration into a unified galactic government under human administration, or be classified as a potential future threat requiring similar resolution. The silence that followed lasted for 17 minutes, as Coalition commanders struggled to comprehend their situation. They had asked for soldiers to help them defeat monsters. Instead, they had recruited monsters who had eliminated their enemies and now ruled through fear rather than alliance. You can't be serious, Voxis finally responded. We're your allies. Today, Wu Jin agreed. But alliances change when circumstances change. Permanent solutions don't. So Young provided helpful clarification. We've analyzed Coalition psychology and determined that your species are capable of aggression under sufficient stress. Your current peaceful nature is a product of favorable circumstances, not fundamental character. When those circumstances change, you'll become dangerous. So you'll kill us to prevent that possibility? Thylin asked. We'll manage you to prevent that necessity, Ji-Sung corrected. Integration allows for species survival under human oversight. Resistance requires more permanent solutions. The Coalition officers realized they were facing the same choice the Voidborn had been given: submit or die. But the humans had demonstrated that even submission might not be enough. They had ignored the Voidborn surrender and proceeded with extermination anyway. Dongmin was already sharing technical specifications for the weapons that had eliminated the Voidborn. Similar systems can be deployed against Coalition worlds within 72 hours, he noted helpfully. Integration is strongly recommended. Across Coalition space, the alien governments received reports of what had happened in the Voidborn home system. The species that had saved them from extinction was now offering them the choice between slavery and death. Some Coalition worlds chose to fight. Human response was swift and absolute. Nanomachine plagues that left no survivors and no evidence that resistance had ever been attempted. Other worlds chose submission, discovering that human integration meant the replacement of local governments with human administrators and the conversion of their militaries into human auxiliary forces. The war that had begun with a desperate plea for help ended with humanity as the undisputed rulers of known space. They governed through a combination of overwhelming force and psychological manipulation, ensuring that their subjects never quite realized they were prisoners. Wu Jin delivered the final report to Earth Command 6 months after the last Coalition world had been integrated. Mission accomplished, he stated in his quiet voice. Threat eliminated. New objectives established. Long-term security maintenance for human interests. Estimated timeline for complete galactic pacification: 15 years. Projected resistance: minimal. On Earth, civilian populations celebrated humanity's emergence as a galactic superpower. They held parades for the returning heroes who had saved the galaxy from the Voidborn menace. The full truth about human methods remained classified, shared only among military leadership, who understood that some victories required sacrifices that civilians couldn't comprehend. The galaxy was finally at peace. It would remain at peace for as long as humanity chose to maintain it. No species would ever again possess the capability to threaten galactic stability, because humanity had learned the most important lesson of warfare. The only enemy who can never hurt you again is an enemy who no longer exists. The Coalition had wanted soldiers to protect them from monsters. They had gotten monsters who were very good at protecting people, whether those people wanted protection or not. And in the end, that was exactly what the galaxy needed. Peace, order, and security, administered by the only species ruthless enough to maintain them permanently. The age of galactic warfare was over. The age of human administration had begun, and it would last forever because humans had solved the fundamental problem of conflict. They had eliminated everyone capable of disagreeing with them.